at Colorado Christian University. We're glad you're here with us tonight. We're also glad for those who are joining with us online or live streaming. My name's Don Sweeting. It's my privilege to serve as Chancellor of Colorado Christian University. One of the strategic priorities of our university is to teach students how to think for themselves. This is an extremely important, but it's become an increasingly more difficult task in our colleges and universities. We live at a time when debate seems to be dying across the U.S. Free speech is not alive and well on campuses. Too often disagreements are seen as something that emotionally or threatens the emotional safety of others. And then we ask sometimes, is it possible anymore to have a rational, non-rancorous debate about any controversial issue these days without being canceled or shouted down or smeared? Too often we don't debate ideas. We simply dismiss a person with a label or a shout and then retreat to the echo chamber of our own preferred media cocoon. We've lost the ability to discuss and argue things civilly. This not only hurts our republic, but it cuts against the very idea of a university where disputation and debate have been part of the learning experience since the Middle Ages. So we started this great debate series at CCU for several reasons. One is to discuss important issues like the one we're going to discuss tonight. But we also started it to provide a forum for principled debate, pursuing truth through civil discourse. And we hope to sharpen our students in the process, helping them learn to argue well by exposing them to good thinkers who model civil reason discussion. The question we're going to be looking at tonight is it in America's interest to defend Taiwan? Recent events have thrust U.S. foreign policy back into the spotlight, and when we wrote that was before October 7th. So recent events have brought all this back into the spotlight and have led to critical debates about the United States and how we interact with various powers, world powers, what policies we pursue, with rising tensions between the United States and China in the South China Sea for regional supremacy. Taiwan, a small country with a complicated but important history in American-Chinese relations, it's at the center of U.S. discussions. The president of China, President Xi, seems poised to regain control over Taiwan. Taiwan's remained fierce in its commitment to freedom and in opposition to Chinese communism, dating all the way back to the Chinese Civil War. All of this raises the question of if China seeks to invade Taiwan, what will America do? Better yet, what should America do? We're glad tonight to be able to partner in hosting this event with ISI, and we're very pleased to have with us guests Will Kruger and Josh Rogan, who will be introduced in a few minutes. I'm also glad to have with us tonight, who I just met, Mr. Bill Huang, who is the General Counsel and Director General of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office here in Denver. Where are you again? Could you please stand? Can we welcome him? At Colorado Christian University, when we have events like this, because we're a Christian university, we usually start with prayer and with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask one of our students, Andrew Borders, to come up. He's a junior, majoring in business, and he's in the honors program. Andrew, would you come up and lead us, please?
Well, as Augustine said, we are citizens of two kingdoms, earthly and heavenly. As Christians, our highest loyalty is to Christ and his kingdom, but we are also called to be good citizens of this republic. Most of us here are citizens of the United States of America. If you are not, please join us by standing for prayer and listen as we say the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. So please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now if you'll please bow your heads with me in a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you that we have the assurance of your word that you are in control. As Psalm 46:11 says, the Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Lord, direct our attention now to these important matters that affect so many people around the world. Place in us a yearning for wisdom and discernment that is of you. Thank you for our debaters here this evening and all their preparation on this topic. Thank you that we have so many people here who value the discourse and discussion and debate we're about to enter into. May we honor you in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Scheffel, and I am the head coach of the speech and debate team here at Colorado Christian University. So I was asked to come up, and since, this is a debate, what a great place here to talk a little bit about the CCU speech and debate team. So we are a comprehensive team. You can look over here, raise your hands, folks. That's the majority of our team over here. We got a few other peppered in throughout the crowd. We're a comprehensive team. We compete in debate, limited prep speaking events such as extemporaneous and impromptu, prepped events such as informative, persuasive speaking, even after dinner speaking if you think that you're humorous. And then we also do interpretive events that is more akin to acting. So whatever your interests are, we do all of it. We're a fully funded team, which means if you would want to join, we travel all over the country. Last year we went to San Francisco. We went to Philadelphia. We went to Boise, Idaho. This year we're going to Nashville and a few other places. So if you join the team, it's fully funded. You get to be able to go to all these places for free. All the food's covered and everything, so you don't have to worry about that. And there's a lot of really cool scholarship opportunities as well if you join the team. So if anyone's interested, be sure to find me afterwards. Find one of our students here. It's a really fun, great opportunity. Especially at a school like CCU, we're going to go out into the real world one day. Right now, we're kind of in the cougar bubble here. But we're going to have to go out in the real world, and we're going to have to stand strong for our beliefs and our worldview in what can often be a hostile environment. And I think our students can tell you that joining the speech and the debate team is a great opportunity for you to be able to do that, to be able to learn to communicate ideas and communicate these important truths to often a hostile crowd is a really good opportunity. And regardless of what your major is, regardless of what your prior experience is, everyone is welcome on the debate team. And I think it's really a great opportunity to really hone your skills in oral communication and persuasion. And that's a skill that I think, regardless of where you're going to be going after you graduate from CCU, would be very helpful for you. So, like I said, if you're interested, be sure to find me afterwards. Find one of our students. We would love to talk your ear off, as I'm sure you can imagine, about all the great benefits of joining the CCU speech and debate team.
Thank you, Stephen Scheffel. Thank you for your coaching our team. Debate team, thank you. We're proud of you. Hope you have a great season. I'd like to introduce our moderator, first of all, and then our co-sponsor. Our moderator for tonight's debate is Colorado Christian University's General Counsel, Mr. Thomas Scheffel. In addition to his current role as General Counsel, a position that he's held since 2018, Mr. Scheffel has served as affiliate faculty for CCU since 1994, developing and teaching multiple courses on business law. He's also been a faculty sponsor for the university's Barrister Club and a volunteer coach for CCU's nationally ranked moot court team. Mr. Scheffel earned his Juris Doctor at Southern Methodist University and his Master of Laws at Taxation from New York University, the world's premier program on taxation. He maintains a private practice, TNS Associates, PC, here in Denver, Colorado, where he specializes in nonprofit, estate, and tax law. Would you please welcome Mr. Tom Scheffel? There you are, Tom. Yeah, right there. Okay. And then I'd like to introduce Mr. Tim Saroof. He is the debate manager for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. I first learned about ISI by reading Modern Age magazine journal, and then learned that they had a debate program, and I contacted them and said, we'd love to work with you. They have been absolutely phenomenal partner to work with. Tim is also the producer of their podcast, Conservative Conversations with ISI. Tim will introduce our guest today. Would you please help me in welcoming Tim Saroof?
Good evening. My name is Tom Saroof, and I'm the debates manager at ISI. I want to take the opportunity to thank CCU for being such gracious hosts. Dr. Sweeting, the Office of the Chancellor, Betsy, the AV team in the back, everyone who helped put this on and make this possible. Very excited for this one. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, whose generous financial support made tonight's debate possible and a part of our ISI's Great Ideas debate series. And finally, thanks to all of you. This is a packed house. This is a great crowd who came out to listen to this debate and participate in both an exchange of ideas and an exercise of free speech, both of which are cornerstones of a free society, but also a pursuit of truth as we try to discern the best path forward for America. As Dr. Sweeting said, our debate culture is broken down in America, and along with it has gone a number of important civic virtues like reasonableness, perspective-taking, wittiness, and sharpness in argument, amongst others. And so tonight offers an opportunity to learn something important from our two debaters and to cultivate important virtues for a Republican society. And I think it couldn't have come at a better time. And a quick word about ISI before we begin. ISI has existed for 70 years to educate for liberty. We are committed to passing down the principles and virtues that have made America free and prosperous, and to bestow upon another generation, that's you and me, I'm only 23 years old, the deepest truths and commitments of the Western tradition. As America stands on perilous ground, as I'm sure we can all feel, and especially as college campuses, I think this fine institution is probably an exception to this rule, run into full-scale madness and a spirit of cultural and civilizational repudiation. We believe at ISI that now is the time to invest in education and in cultivating the next great leadership class that we desperately need. By hosting seminars across the country, sponsoring campus societies and campus lectures, debates like this one, and our annual honors conference, students can learn from our fantastic professors and speakers on a wide array of topics, ranging from political philosophy, culture and the arts, economics, foreign policy, technology and human dignity, and many more. If you'd like to get more involved with ISI, come find me after the debate. I'd love to help you take your education to the next level with our stellar programming. And now I'd like to introduce our two speakers so we can get this thing rolling. First, taking the affirmative is Josh Rogan. Josh is a columnist for the global opinion section of the Washington Post and a political analyst with CNN. He is also the author of Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century, released March 2021 by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Previously, Josh has covered foreign policy and national security for Bloomberg View, Newsweek, The Daily Beast, Foreign Policy Magazine, Congressional Quarterly, Federal Computer Week Magazine, and Japan's Asahi Shimbun. His work has been featured on outlets including NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, MSNBC, NPR, and many more. He's been recognized with the Interaction Award for Excellence in International Reporting and as a finalist for the Livingston Award for Young Journalists. Next, debating in the negative, is William Ruger. Will serves as the president of the American Institute for Economic Research. He earned his PhD in politics from Brandeis University and an AB from the College of William and Mary. His scholarship has appeared in a number of academic journals, including International Studies Quarterly, Review of Political Economy, Economics of Governance, Civil Wars, and Armed Forces of Society. He is also a veteran of the Afghanistan War and was awarded the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, among other decorations. He remains an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserves, and he was nominated to serve as the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan and was a prominent advocate for ending America's participation in the war there. He lives in Great Barrington, Massachusetts with his wife and two sons. And you know Mr. Scheffel, so I'll turn it over to him and welcome our two guests up to the stage. Enjoy the debate, everyone.
Welcome aboard. Thank you. Welcome aboard. All right, everyone, in a moment we're going to say let the games begin. We have just a couple of opening remarks here to get us going. One is that we are going to have a timekeeper. Paige, where is Paige, our timekeeper? Right here. She'll be keeping time as we ask our debaters here to keep an eye on that. The cadence will be opening remarks by speaker one for 10 minutes. That's the positive. That'll be Josh. And then negative will be Will for 10 minutes. Then there'll be rebuttal. That'll be 2 minutes each for rebuttal. At that point, we'll enter into a moderated discussion where we will be asking some questions that I will be moderating. We're going to attempt to create some clash in that regard if it hasn't been created already. At that point, ballots are going to be passed out. We're specifically asking you not to vote until you've seen all of the arguments that will be presented. So while you may come in with an opinion, we understand that, there is going to be a balloted, and you can vote, secret ballots will be handed out so that they can be tallied very quickly. While those ballots are being looked at, the audience will have an opportunity to ask the various debaters questions. That'll be 20 minutes. We're going to watch our time very, very carefully. Then each of the speakers will have closing remarks of 2 minutes each, and that'll then round things out. I will then go ahead and collect the tally from the ballots and make an announcement as to how you folks all voted with respect to the debate that'll be before us. So we're looking forward to a really enjoyable evening tonight. This is a very hot topic, so please join me as we get started. We'll go ahead and ask our first affirmative debater to present here in a moment. Let me just say, real opportunity here to individuals. We had an opportunity to chat a little bit before, and these folks are on it. So be collecting your questions. You're going to get to answer whatever questions you want when it's your turn. Thank you. Gentlemen, let the games begin. I will shake a hand. You got it.
Good evening. Very honored to be speaking with you here tonight in Denver. I have to admit right up front, I'm a bit nervous. This is actually my first public debate, although I've been writing and speaking about Asia and U.S.-Asia relations for just under 20 years now. To start off on such an important topic opposed to such a seasoned debater as my friend opposite Will Ruger is, to be quite honest, a little bit intimidating. I have to admit my ignorance when Will reached out to me on X and asked me if I wanted to debate Taiwan for ISI, my response was, why does the Pakistani intelligence service want to debate Taiwan? Isn't that right? I didn't realize what ISI was. But anyway, when I figured out that it was the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, I said yes right away. So even though I'm not an experienced debater, I am experienced with this issue. I've traveled to Taiwan many times. I spent 20 years traveling back and forth to Asia, learning about what's really going on in this region and what's really going on with this country. And I come at it not as an ideologue, not from a position where I have my own frame of what the world should look like or what the foreign policy ideology is that would lead us to these outcomes. I come at it from the perspective of a reporter, of a journalist. In other words, to see the world as it is and to deal with it on the terms that we find it. And you might call that realist, or you might not, but there you are. And, you know, what I've seen over the last 20 years is that there are two trends in U.S. foreign policy going on that I've documented. One is the rising problems associated with the rise of China, and especially under the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping. And the other is the American people's increasing dissatisfaction with the overextension of U.S. foreign policy and the overextension of U.S. Power abroad. The Taiwan issue sits at the intersection of these trends. As American power and influence abroad lessens over time, Americans' appetite for intervention or even internationalism has waned. I'll be the first to concede right up front at the beginning of this debate that a series of strategic blunders made by the foreign policy establishment in Washington over the course of the last 40 or so odd years have weakened America's credibility and weakened the credibility of that very foreign policy establishment, especially when it comes to the limits of American power and the opportunities for American intervention. The benefits of globalization were not distributed fairly here at home. Simply stated, mistakes were made. But although Will and I may have subtle disagreements within that historical track record, that's not what we're here to debate tonight. The proposition is not about Iraq. It's not about Afghanistan. It's not about Syria. It's not about Libya. It's not even about Ukraine. This is not a debate about libertarianism versus neoconservatism, or between idealism or realism, or intervention versus restraint. This is about Taiwan. The question is it in the best interest of the United States to defend Taiwan? Now, no matter what your ideology, no matter what your political affiliation, no matter what your grievances are about the liberal world order or the congressional industrial military complex, I'm here to convince you that the answer is clearly yes. My argument is based on three premises, each of which I plan to bring receipts. Premise number one, if China takes over Taiwan, American interests are materially and severely harmed. Premise number two, China under Xi Jinping represents a unique and once-in-a-generation threat to the United States, and giving up on Taiwan would be the absolute worst way to deal with that threat. And 3, defending Taiwan is much cheaper and much safer than the alternative. Now, notice that the question is not, is it in America's best interest to defend Taiwan by sending U.S. troops there to fight and die? That's not the question. That is the common straw man that people use to justify abandoning Taiwan. Now, while we were preparing for this debate, we had our own discussion inside the team. Well, are we talking about just defending against a military attack? And the decision was made that no, we're not. For the very simple reason that a military attack on Taiwan is really only one of the many scenarios and one of the many ways which China is attacking Taiwan. In fact, I'm here to argue that a military invasion of Taiwan is actually the least likely scenario of how China is attacking Taiwan, and that in the diplomatic, economic, industrial, cyber, information, political, cultural spheres, that attack is actually ongoing. And by the way, we're actually already defending it. So don't listen to anyone who says, well, we can either abandon Taiwan or we're going to World War III and there's going to be a nuclear war and your friends and brothers and sisters and cousins are going to die. That's the straw man. That's the false choice that we hear a lot. Now, to be sure, Xi Jinping reserves the right to attack Taiwan. To be sure, this is a scenario that we cannot ignore and one that we should prepare for. That's why you hear so much about things like a porcupine approach, and we need to make Taiwan into a porcupine and this and that. I'm not saying that's not a serious scenario. I'm just saying it's only one out of many, okay? This plays into sort of the other argument that I hear for people who want to abandon Taiwan, which is that, oh, well, it's 8,000 miles away, and if there was an attack coming, there wasn't really anything that we could do about it. This was an argument made to me by a man by the name of President Trump when I interviewed him for my book, Chaos Under Heaven, which is still available for purchase now, wherever books are sold in paperback with a new afterword. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. I talked to President Trump. I said, would you defend Taiwan? And he said, I won't tell you, because he was aware of and supported this idea of strategic ambiguity. And then I said, well, come on, just tell me. And he said, I'm going to write a book about it later. That's what he said. I'll reveal it in my book later. I'm like, all right, come on, just tell me. He's like, well, I really shouldn't say, but the truth is we're 8,000 miles away, and China's 2 feet away, and if they invade, there's probably not much we can do about it. And I'm here to tell you that he's right, that's actually true. I've been to Taiwan. I've been to the front lines. I've been to Penghu Island, where the Taiwanese Coast Guard is mounting the first line of defense. If you come from China, you don't put the amphibious boats over 88 miles of choppy water. No, you fly into this island that's right next to the main island. Then you put your boats in, and then you come over and invade Taiwan. And it's true, there's probably nothing under the current scheme that we could do to defend it. But there is a lot that we can do to deter it. And the defense of Taiwan has to be thought of in this holistic effort. We can help Taiwan protect its economy from Chinese coercion. We can help Taiwan protect its information environment from Chinese propaganda. We can help Taiwan protect its infrastructure from Chinese cyber attacks. And of course, we can help Taiwan protect its democracy by helping it deal with massive amounts of Chinese political interference. The question does not say also, and you'll hear this a lot from restrainers, that, oh, you know what, Taiwan's important, but it's not in America's core interest. You'll hear this a lot. Oh, it's not our core interest. Yeah, we care about it, and we like the Taiwanese people. They're super nice, and we'd love for them to keep their democracy and their relative autonomy, but it's not our core interest. Well, that's not the question. The question is not, is it in America's core national interest to defend Taiwan? It's actually, is it in America's interest at all? And unless you're prepared to argue that we have no interest in saving Taiwan, I'm not sure if Will's going to argue that, then I've already won. Then the vote is already yes. And I could stop there. But anyway, I've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to keep on going. That was number 2. China under Xi Jinping is a unique and once-in-a-generation threat to the United States, and giving up on Taiwan would be the absolute worst way to deal with the threat. Now, even your most dedicated restrainers, even the people who want to roll back the liberal world order, or whatever you want to call it, would have to admit, and I think do admit, and I think Will might actually admit, we'll see, that there are different types of threats. And that while we can have an argument about whether Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Bashar al-Assad really represents a threat to the United States national security and U.S. society, debatable. China, no. There's no debate. It is clearly on the order of magnitude of a once-in-a-generational threat. On the order of, let's say, yes, World War II and the Germans, or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. That's a high bar. But in fact, if you look at the capabilities and intent of the Chinese Communist Party, especially under Xi Jinping, they meet that bar and then some. We're going to have an adversary that's going to have the largest economy in the world, and led by a group of gangsters who are committing a genocide and menacing the region and also interfering in our society in a number of ways that we need to respond to. So this is not a threat that we can ignore. This is not a threat that's 8,000 miles away. This is a threat that's already, you can see it on campuses, in Wall Street, definitely in Washington, even in the media. So once we realize that the Chinese Communist Party means us harm and that it is aggressive and totalitarian and expansionist, well, then you realize that giving up on Taiwan is the exact wrong way to deal with it, because we should have learned in the last century that appeasing totalitarian, aggressive, genocidal dictatorships doesn't work. In other words, they get hungrier with the eating. Okay, I got 1 minute left, so let me skip to my last argument, which is that all the alternatives are more expensive, okay? So we always talk about the costs of action. Everything that we do with related to Asia, especially China, has some costs, some risks, some sacrifice, okay? And we never talk about the cost of inaction. What would really happen if we abandoned Taiwan? Well, let's see. 95% of the world's most advanced semiconductors fall under the control of our greatest enemy. Half of the world's ships that pass through the Taiwanese Strait would now be subject to the Chinese Communist Party's coercion. We would essentially be handing over the region of Asia to China and leaving ourselves with no options, in turn undermining all of the alliances that we've built over the last 80 years. Now, I constantly hear from restrainers, well, how come the other countries in the region don't carry the burden? In Asia, they are. Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India, I could go on, Vietnam. They're all stepping up. This is not a problem that's caused by hawks in Washington who are trying to scare us into World War III. The demand signal is coming from the region, okay? And what that means is that if we pull the rug out from under Taiwan, we are pulling the rug out from that system. We are telling countries around the world that they should share the burden, and then when they do it and they step up, we tell them, second thought, we don't care anymore. So to conclude, if you don't agree with me that Taiwan is something that's in our interest to defend, and if you don't agree with me that China is a once-in-a-generation threat to our way of life, our national security, our prosperity, our freedom, and our independence and autonomy as a society, and if you don't agree with me that abandoning Taiwan would undermine our position in the region, then let me make to you one final appeal. Greater than geopolitics, greater than any, battle over semiconductors, there's something innate. You may say it's given to us by a higher power. You may say we're born with it. Either way, I'm fine. That says that human beings have the right to dignity, to self-determination, and to free speech, freedom of religion. These are things that bind us, not as Americans, as human beings. And to sacrifice Taiwan, which is valiantly striving to maintain those rights, would be a slippery slope that would lead to the erosion of those around the world. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Josh. So let me start by thanking our hosts and Josh for participating in this debate. I think real substantive and civil debate between people who disagree is lacking in a more polarized world. So I was more than happy to agree to do this and to do it with Josh. Now I'm going to answer the question squarely and literally. The question asks if it is in the best interest of the United States to defend Taiwan. It is important that the question doesn't ask whether it is in the best interest of humanity or universal values that Josh just referenced, or the Taiwanese people, or its neighbors. It asks whether it is best for the United States. So I'm focused on America here. It is also important that the question uses the word defend, which I take to mean here in this context as the active use of American military power to help ward off an actual or imminent attack by China against Taiwan. Now, I take it this way because it wouldn't be a very interesting debate if what was meant was whether it was in the best interest of the United States to, before a war broke out, encourage greater military spending by Taiwan, or to sell Taiwan weapons so that it could deter a Chinese invasion or actually defend itself in the event that Taiwanese conventional deterrence failed. So in that sense, Josh and I agree. So it is not an argument that we simply ignore it. Because I favor the sale of weapons to Taiwan so that it can become a porcupine. I mean, Josh read my speech, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. It's a common argument, right? So it'd be good for Taiwan to become a porcupine that China would not attack, or at least would have second thoughts about attacking, because the potential benefits would be unlikely to outweigh the potential costs. So in this case, I would support helping Taiwan develop what Notre Dame professor and former Department of Defense official Eugene Goltz calls a defensive defense rather than an offensive defense. In other words, we should encourage Taiwan to take advantage of new defensive technologies to build strong, what are called anti-access area denial capabilities, A2AD, rather than planning for and trying to build the capability to confront China's own A2AD capabilities and strike China itself either ashore or on its coasts. Taiwan doesn't need to be a mini U.S. military that would come at the expense of building the defensive capabilities to raise the cost of a Chinese attack. Going for an offensive capability would be playing into a Chinese defensive strength given its use of surveillance and military technologies rather than leaning into the fact that today's world is defense dominant, as we've seen in Ukraine. Namely, technologies and tactics favor defensive operations today rather than offensive ones. So it's more like 1914 than 1939. This approach would also be a lot cheaper and less likely, as Goltz has noted, to stimulate Chinese fear of U.S. offensive operations that could knock them out, thus encouraging arms races or trying to get first mover advantage by striking first. So again, if the question is whether we should help in some way Taiwan to defend itself, then there isn't a debate. So let's go to the more debatable question in my view. Is it in our interest to defend Taiwan should they be attacked or face an imminent attack? Because I think Josh was a little bit slippery, right? He talked about how China is such a huge threat to civilization itself, to the values that we care about. And yet, he sort of suggested that, if it really comes down to it, we're not sending any of our sons and daughters there because we care about it, but not so much, right? Or at least it's not in the cards right now as he presented it. And so what I'm trying to say is, look, have the courage of your convictions, which I know Josh does, and say, hey, yeah, we ought to do this. It's so darn worth it that we fight China, that we sacrifice our sons and daughters for that cause, just like it was important enough to do it against the Nazis and to do it against the British when our country was founded. But my answer for this particular case, unlike those two cases, is the answer is no. It would not be in our interests. This is one reason why I want Taiwan to become a porcupine, because I want Taiwan to be a porcupine so that it is much less likely that there's a war. And thus it's less likely that the United States would be sucked into a conflict by its leaders who are all too willing, as we've seen over the last 30 years, to get the United States into wars that are not good for us. Now, the lack of an American interest in fighting a war for Taiwan is also why I favor a continuation of the long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, which, given the political winds, means we don't change our position and strongly signal to both Taiwan and China that we will defend the island country. Sending that signal would be a mistake. It would induce moral hazard or risk-taking by Taiwan and its neighbors, or even stimulate China to attack under currently unfavorable terms for China so as to prevent a future that would be even worse for China. And if American hawks don't like the idea of China gaining an island aircraft carrier that can help project power into the Pacific, imagine how you'd feel if you're China to have a robust American strike capability on such an island carrier less than 100 miles from their coast. So why do I think defending Taiwan is opposed to our interests? And I mean defending literally. Surely it wouldn't be ideal to have Taiwan swallowed by China, okay? Taiwan is a democratic country. It doesn't want to be ruled by China. I wouldn't either. I don't like the regime. And we have strong economic relations with Taiwan, including in the important advanced semiconductor sector. Moreover, the status quo of China being a bit boxed in is at least good for its neighbors and could be argued good for us as well. So just as is often the case in foreign policy making, and this is something we've lacked over the last 30 years, is this notion that we're facing one of many bad choices if it came to a decision to go to war with Taiwan. But we have to look at the costs of acting, not just the cause of inaction. And too often over those 30 years, it's been, if we don't do X, the world will collapse. If we don't confront Saddam Hussein, he'll be aggressive. If we don't confront Slobodan Milosevic, it'll be 1938 again. Okay? The fact is that there are costs of acting, not just of not acting. And here is where the case for defending Taiwan falls apart. As UK security studies scholar Patrick Porter has noted, while Taiwan's fate matters, it does not matter enough for US security interests to justify such a great risk. A conflict with China in this matter would likely inflict the very damage that proponents of fighting fear. So let me run through some of those while I have a few more minutes. First, the costs of even a conventional conflict with China are too high relative to the benefits, especially if we could take measures now to make sure our semiconductor supply chain is robust. And that would eliminate one of the actual interests we might have. So let's talk about the military costs. So the military costs of a conflict would be huge, even if we ultimately won. The Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington conducted a series of 24 computer war games related to a China-Taiwan war that if the U.S. entered. And in these war games, China didn't fare too well overall. But even successful U.S. defenses weren't rosy outcomes. As the report noted, defense came at high cost. The United States and its allies, and really listen to this part, because this is really what we're talking about, blood and treasure. The allies lost dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and tens of thousands of service members. Further, the high losses damaged the U.S. global position for many years. And CSIS is not exactly a hotbed of restrainer views. As one analyst put it, even this outcome is based on assumptions that might not prevail in the event of a real war. And we know through history, just ask Russia, that wars are almost always much deadlier and costly than even we anticipate getting into them. It's just a real challenge for the United States to support Taiwan militarily, given the basic geography and the battle of will. Now, in terms of the economic costs, think about how interwoven the American and Chinese economies are. The U.S. cost, according to the RAND Corporation, is that the United States would lose $1.2 trillion in lost economic activity. U.S. trade with China right now is $690 billion alone. The other thing is that we can't forget that there is a chance of a nuclear spiral, okay? It's not zero. And remember, risk is probability multiplied by consequence. So think of how high a risk it is when even if the probability is only raised a bit for a nuclear exchange, the cost is potentially losing cities, not thousands of people, but potentially millions. And would we really think saving Taiwan was worth it if we lost Guam or Seattle in the process? The other thing is that economically, trade with Taiwan is important, but it's not existential to the American economy. Okay? U.S. trade with Taiwan is about $160 billion. We'll spend that on the war in Ukraine alone. And one of the things about the semiconductor industry is that the current importance of the semiconductors is a reason to avoid provoking a conflict right now. And maybe in the Q&A we could talk a little bit more about the semiconductors. But the other thing is, if you're worried about like that 1938 scenario that Josh brought up, the idea that today Taiwan, tomorrow Japan, and the rest of Asia, I think you could put that concern to rest. Dominoes aren't going to fall all over Asia just because Taiwan does. And Josh even mentioned this. Japan and other countries in the region have an incentive to balance against Chinese power and aggression. They're already doing some of that. They'll do it even more if China takes Taiwan. So there'll be a naturally occurring balancing in the region. Plus, we could rely on our extended nuclear deterrent to support our allies, and this deterrent would be especially credible in those circumstances. But lending that credibility to Taiwan just isn't, because China views Taiwan as part of China, and it's not something that's believable that we would actually go to the brink for that. Lastly, if you think we could merely break a blockade or send in material to support during a hot conflict and avoid a hot war, think again. Support will lead to active intervention. If a war starts, as Patrick Porter notes, China will be in it all the way, since a loss of Taiwan would be existential for the Communist Party in Beijing in a way that could be never mirrored for the United States. And so there's an imbalance of wills. And when you have an imbalance of wills, you're going to have an imbalance of the means you're willing to put into it. And so again, I feel that this would be very costly to the United States, very harmful for our sons and daughters in uniform, and thus something we should try to avoid doing. Thank you.
We will now have 2 minutes of rebuttal from each party.
I think actually there is a lot that Will and I agree on. But on the core issue of whether or not the world would be okay if China swallows up Taiwan, I'd have to insist on disagreement. It's not really about trade, right? Taiwan's not a big trading partner. But I've yet to hear from Will a solution to what happens when 95% of the world's most advanced semiconductors fall under the control of our greatest enemy. Now, I've heard other solutions from other restrainers. You might have heard that presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has an idea. He says, we'll protect Taiwan for 4 years, then we'll move all the semiconductors here, and then they're on their own. Good luck. Now, the reason that is ridiculous is because it's impossible, because even under our current plan to onshore semiconductor manufacturing, it would only be a couple of percentage points over 10 years. So he's being totally disingenuous, which I don't think Will would adopt that position. Some people will say, well, let's bomb TSMC, let's bomb the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. That strikes me as equally insane. Can you imagine a scenario where we attack our allies' infrastructure in order to save them, burn the village to save the country? How did that work out in Vietnam? So I think we have to understand that when China takes over Taiwan, our core economic prosperity is at dire, dire threat, full stop. Now, I don't want to be seen to be ducking the question about the military invasion because I only have 1 minute left, so let me address it head on, okay? I spoke to, again, I don't know if Will has done this. I spoke to Taiwanese generals, reservists, soldiers, done the work, the reporting. What they tell me is that they could really only hold out under current plans for 6 hours before they would need an intervention. 6 hours, okay? Now, that seems clear that in that scenario we would not get there in time, even in the best case scenarios. Yeah, porcupine, great, let's do that. The idea of a porcupine strategy is to make the mission more difficult. So 6 hours could go to 12 hours. But that doesn't solve the problem. If China attacks, it's over, okay? And I agree with Will that any sort of rear action guard to try to support them after that will fail. That's why the deterrence is the defense. The only way to defend Taiwan is to deter China, and the military is a small, tiny part of that. And at least we realize that just talking about the military is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants. It's exactly the distraction, the trap that they're setting for us. And Will and the other restrainers are walking right into it by saying, oh, well, World War III nuclear weapons, your sons and daughters are going to die. The fight over Taiwan is where the attack is. It's all of the other parts of national power and influence besides the military, and that's what we haven't yet talked about. And I hope to hear some solutions on that in the next rebuttal. Thank you.
I guess if Taiwan can't hold out for much longer than the kind of strategic millisecond, then it's almost a moot question. Like, the answer is that our best interests are not justified by trying to defend Taiwan, because we've already seen the admission that it's going to be very difficult to do so. We're talking about deterrence. The challenge, of course, is that deterrence, if you've taken International Relations 101, right? What are the 3 C's of deterrence, right? Capability, credibility, and commitment. So a U.S. attempt to support deterrence in Taiwan is not that credible, right? We would have to do a lot to make it credible, and doing that could actually provoke what we don't want. That's why we have a policy of strategic ambiguity, because we don't believe that we can actually have a credible commitment. And if we made a commitment, that could stimulate what we don't want. Now, capability-wise, sure, we have nuclear weapons, we could try to extend our deterrent, but extended deterrence isn't all that robust and certainly wouldn't be believed in this case because there's even a debate about whether we should recognize Taiwan officially, whether we're not even thinking about stationing troops there right now, so imagine how believable the idea would be that we would go to nuclear warfare in order to protect Taiwan against an amphibious invasion. So I just think that deterrence is hardly credible unless it is deterrence by the Taiwanese themselves. And what they need to do, like I said, is they need to lean in to the revolution in military technologies that favors the defensive, okay? Stop buying some of the things that they've been buying and lean in to defensive dominant technologies. Don't try to mirror the United States' approach to warfare, but try to do something that's more organic. This is a lesson we should have learned in Afghanistan where we tried to build something like U.S. military junior. We shouldn't want Taiwan to replicate that either. But I just don't think it's all that credible that the United States is going to do this, especially given that Taiwan is very different politically in terms of how we view it and how U.S. policy has approached it than it is, say, Japan, a long-standing American ally where there's no ambiguity about both the alliance and that long tradition of entanglement with them. So thank you very much.
My mic working? Very good. Well, congratulations, gentlemen. I think we've raised the issue here. I'm going to step away from being in between so that if it does go to fisticuffs, at least we'll be able to observe that. So we do have, and I'll ask the timekeeper to keep track of our time frame, if you would, 30 minutes, and we're going to get right at it. So I would like to propose that the word defend, it's very tough to put a lid on that. I think most people in normal parlance would look at that and say, well, where do I draw the line? Or is it possible that even if I've drawn the line, that defending based on escalation is tough to put a backstop on? And I think that would be sort of a common understanding just from a general debate standpoint. So I have a question here. Start. Is there a moral obligation, a legal obligation with possibly political undertones relating back to the body of law that seems to govern this, the Taiwan Relations Act, 96-8 Public Law, January 1, 1979. That's been on the books for quite some time. And I'd like to hear from both of you with opportunity for comment, rebuttal, and then back again one last time before we go to our next question. And Josh, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure, I think it's the perfect follow-up because I'm sorry to say I have to point out a couple of inaccuracies in the last part of your presentation. First of all, you said there is no debate over we're having a debate over recognizing Taiwan officially. No, we're not. There's nobody really having that debate. Actually, I went to an event with the vice president of Taiwan, William Lai. I met him a couple of weeks ago. This is the Chinese propaganda. Taiwans are separatists. They're going to declare independence, especially the DPP. We can't support that. That's provocative, and that's going to create the provocation that's going to tip Xi Jinping over, okay? That's obviously false because the DPP itself, William Lai himself, has said very clearly, we don't seek formal independence. We don't need to seek formal independence. The DPP's position long has been, President Tsai as well, we have independence. We are an independent country, de facto independent country to be sure, and there's no benefit for taking that extra step. So there is no debate over recognizing Taiwan because it's not what any party in Taiwan is seeking. The other thing that you said that I thought was wrong is we don't have a commitment. Well, that speaks to your question exactly. We do have commitments, not just under the Taiwan Relations Act, but also in the set of understandings that we made with Beijing when we normalized relations and they established the One China principle and we established the One China policy. They have a principle, we have a policy. Their principle is Taiwan is ours. Our policy is we understand that's your position, but we don't take a view on that one way or the other. And then what the TRA says is we will provide Taiwan. We commit to providing Taiwan the means to defend itself from invasion, which we aren't doing. So we do have commitments, and we're not meeting them, and that is a problem. But to take it to the core of your issue, which is what does it mean to defend? What are we defending? What is it that we're defending? We're defending the status quo. We're defending this current state of relations, which has maintained peace and stability for the last 40 some odd years. And who's attacking that? Not us. not the Taiwanese, not even the DPP. It's Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. They're the ones upsetting the status quo. They're the ones breaking their commitments. They're the ones with increasing the military aggression. And so when we say, oh, well, we can't provoke the aggressors, we fail to understand that actually weakness and appeasement is the exact way to provoke the aggressors. And by the way, Xi Jinping doesn't need to be provoked. He's already attacking. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this question in a larger context, which is that I think there's a difference between individual morality and how states should approach moral questions. So Max Weber talks about the ethic of responsibility versus the ethic of ultimate ends. And so when it comes to, say, a decision about whether you rescue a drowning baby, the clear answer for any moral person, Christian or otherwise, I think is obvious there. Especially because you're only deciding for yourself. So even if it's a baby in the river that leads to Niagara Falls, you may have an individual moral duty. It may even be supererogatory, but there's still a moral duty there, and you're putting yourself on the line. But there's a different morality when you have a morality of kind of responsibility for others, and that's what happens in politics, right? You have a moral responsibility not to merely ultimate ends, but to in a case of a liberal democracy, to the social contract, to our constitutional order, to the people you are elected to be responsible for protecting, right? And under those conditions, you have to, there's not solutions, it's more trade-offs, right? And I would say that there's a greater moral responsibility to the well-being of your own state, of your own society, than there is to others, right? So this is one of the reasons why states don't practice altruism. And even when they do practice a form of altruism, they try to justify it based on moral responsibility because they understand that most people appreciate the fact that the whole nature of the social contract or of a government is to provide for the parties of that society, not anyone, right? And so one of the things is, like, if we had a responsibility, a kind of morality of ultimate ends, then you might say, like, hey, we need to go protect Uyghurs, and if that means, we lose Los Angeles, but we protect the Uyghurs, hey, that's the moral price we have to run that risk. But I think one of the reasons why we really never talk about intervening for the Uyghurs is because we understand that states have a moral responsibility to their own communities, and that means they have to engage in the virtue of prudence, and that prudence has to be balanced against other moral, against other types of virtues. And so it's a long and short of saying, no, we don't have any moral responsibility to send our sons and daughters, our cousins, our brothers, our parents to fight for Taiwan, even if it would be terrible if this happened to Taiwan, which I believe it would. Legally, again, we do not have a commitment to do very much at all for Taiwan, particularly the most important things, which would be something akin to, say, an Article 5, which we don't have. And even Article 5, by the way, of the NATO Charter, it actually doesn't specify you actually have to come to the defense, right? Even Ivo Dalger, who was involved in NATO, had said on the record that you could send basically a stern letter of regret in response to a breaking of or the kind of imposition of an Article 5 guarantee. So we clearly don't have more than that to Taiwan. So we have almost no commitments. And the other thing I would say is, like, the United States was founded in one way, in some ways, and practiced prudence over commitments even when we had them. Our most important alliance in American history, you could argue, was our alliance with the UK and the Soviet Union during World War II. But you could also say the most important alliance was our alliance with the French, because otherwise we might not even have a country. And what happened to the French alliance when our interests collided with our commitments? George Washington, our greatest American president, went with our interests rather than those commitments. And he broke the alliance for good reason, and thank goodness, because we would have fought a war with the British earlier than would have been prudent. So again, no moral or legal obligations in my view.
Just a very quick response. I think really you've sort of shown your hand with that Uyghur example, because what you said was we have to choose between helping the Uyghurs or losing Los Angeles. This is the classic false choice, the classic maximalist, scary thing that basically says, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, so we should just let the atrocities go on. Now, as it turns out, that we do intervene on behalf of the Uyghurs, pretty extensively, actually. We have something called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which prevents any American company from importing anything from Xinjiang that's connected to Uyghur forced labor, which is everything, okay? And we do that not only because, we really care about those Uyghur people who are suffering, but because we understand intellectually that if the Chinese are able to produce slave labor goods forever, there's no way American or Western companies can compete, that it undermines the very fabric of the international trade system. And so it's not just because we're nice people. We do intervene against the Uyghurs with various coercive tools, including some very serious economic warfare tools, because it's in our direct economic interest, and I don't think anyone could really dispute that. So yes, if every time we say, oh, well, should we help Taiwan do this? You say, well, do you want your son to die? Do you want to lose Los Angeles? That's kind of the level of the Taiwan discussion that we've been getting in Washington for 20 years, and it's super dangerous because it fails to recognize what I call the reality of the situation, which is that this competition is on. It's ongoing right now. And we are defending Taiwan, and we know that it's in our interest. And if you only consider the most maximalist, most risky, most outlandish scenario, well then, yeah, I don't want a nuclear war any more than else. But it doesn't solve the problem, and it only leads you to one conclusion, which is that, oh, well, we can just lose. Yeah, we can lose. There is a scenario where we let the genocides go on, we let the Taiwan get sucked up into mainland China, everything. We let the Middle East, whatever. We put up the Fortress America gates, and we hope for the best. I'm just saying that doesn't sound like a good plan to me. In fact, it's not our plan, and it shouldn't be. And I think that's what we have to.
Again, in my comments at the beginning, I already stressed the fact that my view isn't that we shouldn't do anything. I said we should help Taiwan become a porcupine. We should encourage them, right? But what I'm saying, though, is that when it comes right down to it, especially given the prompt, when we talk about kind of an active defense, the thing that's actually going to make the difference if things kick off in Taiwan, the most important, I think, debate we can have now is, are we going to actually do it, in the sense of, are we going to do what we've done so often in the past? Sometimes rightly in our national interests, like it was when we confronted Germany in 1941, but also we've done it in ways that were unnecessary and harmful to our interests, like in Vietnam, like in Iraq, and in so many other places. And so what I'm asking for is to have a conversation, because I don't think what we want to do is allow things to happen so quickly that we in a democracy aren't going to get a say on this, which is to say, let's say that China kicks off, and then we're like, what do we do? Well, for one, we have an imperial presidency in which the president isn't going to rush out to probably ask Congress what we're doing. He's going to send the Seventh Fleet into action. That's not the time to have the debate when Americans are in harm's way. We have to have that debate now about the military use of force, right? The use of force, the use of military power, because I already agree we should do diplomatic, intelligence, economic things that can help be supportive of our interests, particularly our economic ones. But we've got to confront the military one, because that's where the rubber hits the road. And if it, like I said earlier, Josh, if it's so important that China not swallow up Taiwan, and it's so important that because these dominoes are going to fall, if I were in your shoes, I'd be making the case for a more active U.S. intervention in this warfare, and say, just like in the CSIS study, I'm willing to sacrifice tens of thousands of Americans because I want to stop that, because the world, it will be 1938. But if it's not 1938, then let's think about other options. And I'm saying it's not 1938.
No, I don't think I'm saying it is 1938. I'm saying it's 2023. And in 2023, we have national security as a purely military consideration. It's not the way the world works. It's obvious. It's pretty clear. But let me not be seen to dodge your question, because although we did determine in our that defense is not confined to military, I don't want to be seen as ducking the question of military intervention. And what I would say is this: look at a very imperfect analogy, but at least one that's grounded in the 21st century, which is Ukraine. Now, okay, deterrence failed against Vladimir Putin, a nuclear power, not really a peer competitor, but kind of, biggest land war in Europe. We are directly military intervening militarily, intelligence, support, tons of weapons, tons of money, a lot. It's a big military intervention, but it doesn't involve U.S. troops. Not one U.S. troop has died. So even when we're talking about military intervention, it's absurd to immediately jump to the conclusion that U.S. troops are going to die, because we have the example of that, just one second, which is Ukraine, which is where we are intervening militarily very heavily, and no U.S. troops have died. Not only that, there hasn't been a nuclear war. Why is that? How can we sit here today? Are you worried about nuclear war? Have you dug your bunker? Have you dug your bunker for when Putin is going to nuke the U.S.? No. Why? Because actually, conventional wars don't necessarily tip over to nuclear war, because these evil dictators are not suicidal, okay? Xi Jinping is not suicidal. In the nuclear exchange, as horrible as it would be, we win, okay? And that's the end of the Xi Jinping regime. That's why Putin hasn't nuked Ukraine, because we told him that that would be, and let me address the issue that you raised with the conventional war with China. Again, look at Ukraine. I'm not saying that we're doing everything in Ukraine right. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to champion the Ukraine intervention. I'm just saying that even if I concede to you that we're talking about military intervention alone, and I don't, but if I did, the answer to the resolution would still be yes, because we've shown in Ukraine that actually we can intervene militarily without a conventional war with the great power, without it rising into nuclear exchange, and with some benefits. And I hope we don't, yes, my first desire is that we don't get into that situation with China and Taiwan. But yes, if they attacked and they took over, yeah, I would get up on this stage and say, we should take a Ukraine-style approach, which is that we help them fight back. Okay, we make sure that if China thinks about going to that next place, to Japan, that they don't have the means to do it. That if we didn't stop them in Hong Kong, then we should stop them in Taiwan. If we don't stop them in Taiwan, they're gonna keep going. And the only relevant tie to 1938 is that we have 100 years of evidence to show that aggressive, totalitarian, genocidal dictators, their appetite grows with the eating. It happens every time. They push and push and push until they meet resistance. And we failed in Taiwan, in Hong Kong rather, and we failed in Ukraine. I hope we don't fail in Taiwan, because I think that would be a terrible, terrible scenario.
So I'm glad you bring up this analogy, actually. For one of the reasons why we didn't see a further escalation is actually because the administration was either practicing some forms of restraint, or the restraint community pushed back against the hawks who would want to do more. So here's an example. The Atlantic Council and a number of other people put together an argument for why we should have a no-fly zone in Ukraine. And restrainers jumped into action and pushed back against that. Whether it was in the cards in the Biden administration or not, the fact is we didn't do a no-fly zone in Ukraine. If we had done a no-fly zone in Ukraine, I believe that we would have gone to war with Russia. But to defend Taiwan, you would have to do something like a no-fly zone, okay? How are you going to keep China from taking the island and being able to support it, bringing ships into Taiwan ports without that air superiority, or without fighting back actively? Because one thing that's different is Ukraine has Poland next to it, okay? What is next to Taiwan? Water, okay? It's going to be really hard to get material into Taiwan successfully without running afoul of Chinese invading forces in ways that were not relevant to this conflict. So I think that actually the analogy shows you why we have to be especially cautious with Taiwan, because we had to be cautious with Ukraine. And by the way, if we had done everything that the Ukraine hawks wanted us to do, again, I think we would be in a hot war with Russia, and the chance of an escalatory spiral was not there. I mean, again, a lot of the most irresponsible voices on Ukraine are saying we haven't done enough. And again, there's a chance that we could still escalate into a conflict, because what if Russia starts to win a war of attrition? Then what happens? So again, I think this is an analogy that supports why actually we need to be especially cautious.
We can go on to the next question. Just very quick point. I think if the restrainers claiming credit for the Biden administration policy is kind of like the rooster claiming credit for the sunrise.
All right. Well, I'm glad I'm not sitting in the middle, aren't you all? Sort of that.
The reason Biden didn't do more in Ukraine has nothing to do with the restrainers. We don't have time for that. Let's get back to Taiwan.
definitely a debate, and I should be wearing a referee's outfit here as opposed to a moderator. So
It's
this is
all fun. We're good.
This is exactly what we want. Is actually what we're
Civil
looking for.
debate.
So I'm going to invite to the conversation the law of unintended consequences. My next question is for you, Will, and it is this. So you're inviting this whole notion of maybe foreign policy ambiguity. You'd like to have a conversation that deals with what does defend mean, what are the backstops on that, et cetera. So we have some clarity in that regard. My question to you, and I'm interested in the response, does that not, if there is indeed clarity, does that not invite China to act if it's clear that the foreign policy, even under the Taiwanese Relations Act, et cetera, is not to cross the Rubicon of any kind of military intervention?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you should avoid saying everything you think when you do diplomacy. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't think and think hard about it. And so, yeah, I favor strategic ambiguity, especially because I think that the status quo is beneficial to the United States and to Taiwan. But again, I think that we ought to be very clear because, again, we don't want to walk into something by bureaucratic inertia, right? We don't want to walk into something because the first thing on the mind of people who have a kind of, I think, instinct about where are the carriers when something kicks off, I don't want them thinking that. I'm fine with them keeping it ambiguous in terms of what they say, but that doesn't mean they have to think everything. I mean, again, I think we were talking earlier a little bit about Machiavelli. I think he would counsel that same type of realism, and that's well, I think, suited to the world of diplomacy, which isn't beanbag.
Yeah, I mean, I think the policy of strategic ambiguity has served us well over the last 45 years. So in that sense, I agree with you. And I agree that there's a public conversation and a private conversation going on. Let me tell you a little bit about the private conversation that's going on. I had a peek into it recently. I went to Tokyo, and I interviewed Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, okay? He's the liberal-ish prime minister, dove-ish, for the LDP anyway, who succeeded Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, Shinzo Abe was the hawk, right? The dangerous hawks are going to lead us into World War III with China, right? And here comes Prime Minister Kishida, who doubles Japan's defense budget, okay, over 5 years, pushes it through, removes 80 years of Japanese pacifism to take them from 1% to 2%, which is like $50 billion a year. All right. Now, he's the liberal. He's not the hawk. Why did he do that? I asked him, and he said, well, the truth is that we don't choose the era in which we have leadership. We deal with the options that are before us, and we make decisions in the best interests of our security. In other words, we're facing a very real situation here where Taiwan is under a very real threat. Now, if you look at what the Japanese are doing, they're not building aircraft carriers. They're getting ready. They're moving things closer to Taiwan. They're preparing for a joint mission, okay? Now, they're pre-positioning forces. They're trying to raise that 6 hours and shorten the time for the response. It's a very difficult thing, and I could give you examples in South Korea where they've thrown off 80 years of pressing Japan for apologies for war crimes because now they're afraid of China. The Philippines, okay, have complete 180. Don't get me started on India, okay, because what's happening now is that the entire region is coming to realize that all of these nice things that we put in place are under threat, not because we're hawkish, not because China hawks in Washington decided that we're going to provoke a cold, because something changed in China. Xi Jinping changed their policy. He changed their strategic approach, okay? He upset the status quo. And to restore that balance is the only way to maintain the peace. And to prepare for war, as George Washington once said, is the best way to maintain the peace, okay? And so by pulling the rug out from under Taiwan, you're not just sacrificing Taiwan, which again, I think is worthy enough of voting yes, just because I don't think we can sacrifice Taiwan for our own interests. But if you're not convinced by that, keep in mind that we'd be pulling the rug out from Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and India and Australia and Vietnam, and I could go on. And that would essentially roll up what have been 70 years of security architecture, U.S.-led security architecture in Asia. They can't do it without us. So it's not perfect. You may think that this system of alliances is not perfect. I don't think it's perfect, but it is our strategic advantage. China will have more people, more money, more power than any adversary we've ever faced, including 1938 and the Cold War. And the only way to match that is with allies. So by throwing Taiwan under the bus, we're throwing all of those allies under the bus. And that is just a scenario that I think for whatever cost you want to appoint is really, really important to understand.
So my quick response is Vietnam. People made the same argument about Vietnam. We can't get out of Vietnam. We can't pull the rug out from under the South Vietnamese government because then the Europeans and the Japanese and others will not believe that we will support our commitments in the Cold War fight against the Soviet Union. We pulled out of Vietnam and we won the Cold War. And our allies, there are ways in which we could shore up those commitments to those allies short of actually having to stay in Vietnam forever. So I don't believe that if Taiwan, if we did not defend Taiwan actively in the event of a Chinese invasion, that there wouldn't be ways short of war to justify a commitment. Remember, alliances are meant to help deter wars and win wars in case you fight them. So in order to keep our alliances strong, we have to fight a war against China, against Taiwan. That seems to put the kind of the cart before the horse, right? It doesn't make sense to do it that way. I would say that the other thing I would say about this is that I think what Josh points to is actually that there is a natural balancing that happens in international politics. There's a natural equilibrium that occurs. And I think you're seeing that. And one way in international politics to gain an advantage, actually, is you should buck pass. Right? One of the things that the United States has done over the last 30 years that's been so problematic is rather than having our allies share the burden or even trying to buck pass to our allies have buck passed to us, and we've said, sure, because we're like we're the nice guy, hey, we'll take it on our chin. But in a world of geoeconomic competition, and this is something that's in the literature, Robert Gilpin and others talk about how hegemony has the seeds of its own destruction, because the hegemon pays the cost of public goods for its allies, and eventually the allies can even overtake the hegemon, as well as other states, because you're burdened down, right? You keep rolling that stone up the hill, and it's just so hard, and eventually it rolls back on you, okay? And so I think that what we want to do is we do want to encourage our allies to do more and more. It's just hard to make that credible without doing some backpassing, making some threats. So what Donald Trump did, for example, to Europe, by really pushing them and threatening to withdraw from NATO, is actually a good way to stimulate allies to do more, because sometimes you have to talk tough like that. But again, I don't think that if Taiwan fell to China, that the Japanese and others would bandwagon. That's not a naturally occurring phenomenon for peer competitors in a strategic competition like you would have in Asia. What we usually see is balancing, and that's what would occur.
I'd like to walk down one final question here, and we'll be getting to your questions then, and that's what I'm going to call the doomsday alley here for a moment, all right? Let's just imagine for a moment that foreign policy ambiguity is kind of the word of the day. There's a little sense of uneasiness. We're not sure what America is going to do. It's kind of what the status quo is, right? They may not, who knows, but we're not going to push that button unless we really think that we can get there from here, and I'm trying to think where China's at. On the other hand, you're saying, I think, we got to defend these folks. Defend is the right word, but we're just going to put a backstop on that. We all sort of know inside ball that we're not going to go the distance if that's the case, but we're going to certainly signal that we're pretty serious about things. The question I think that would be in my mind and on a number of people's mind is, okay, how do you put a lid on that if you've got Washington crawling with both hawks and the contrary? All of a sudden you send the 7th Fleet, one of the comments here, 7th Fleet shows up, China thinks they've got a shot here, so they take out 1 or 2 of our carriers. Now what? At what point do we say, wait a minute, you cannot do that, we're going to go ahead and respond? Nukes are not on the table, but they're not off the table, but it's certainly a robust response when we have 1 or 2 carriers that are at the bottom of the South China Sea.
Sure. So first of all, I have to say that, I spent a lot of time in Taiwan war games in Washington. I find them all to be pretty crap. They're really awful. Most of them involve, and I'm not speaking about the CSIS one in particular, but I think it applies, some sort of trench ground warfare inside Taiwan, where Taiwanese, young people are picking up stores of M16s that they've hidden in their basements and are taking to the streets to shoot down Chinese choppers. I don't understand really why anyone would believe that if there really was a fight with Taiwan, that would be waged primarily on Taiwanese soil, because I don't think anyone in Taiwan thinks that. Actually, I know that. I've been outside of Taipei. I've been to the front lines. It's not that's not the scenario. The scenario is more like what you said. It's a naval and air power battle, okay? And what that essentially means is that if the U.S. carrier was shot down, just to take your premise on its face, it's very clear that Japan would get involved, and then, of course, China would activate North Korea. North Korea would attack South Korea. It would very quickly spiral into a all-out regional conflict. Would that conventional conflict move to nuclear weapons? Given Kim Jong-un, you can't rule it out, okay? So in a sense, managing that escalator once the carrier is in the ocean is impossible. I can concede that. So, of course, the only way to make a policy is to avoid that scenario, to make the Chinese think that they would never try it, okay? And I think that's where, again, we sort of get back to the deterrence question. So, in that overall war where China is attacking the United States and North Korea is attacking South Korea, and they're both attacking Japan, and the U.S. and South Korea and Japan, and now Australia's coming in, who knows what the Philippines do. That's a nightmare. That's World War III, right? No one's saying that should be the goal. What I'm simply saying is that if you don't like that idea, if you don't think that an American president, we don't even know who it's going to be at that time, would pull that trigger and put those troops in harm's way, then really the only sane thing to do is to realize that the only way to stop that is to make Taiwan not just militarily a porcupine, but a country that enjoys our economic support, our public support, our diplomatic support, for it to join international organizations, our trade support, our free trade agreement. Why don't we do that? It's not a cop-out to say that the defense of Taiwan involves more than bullets. It's the most important point of the night. It's the most important thing that you should come away with, because in any scenario where we limit our defense of Taiwan to guns and bullets, I think we've already lost the thread.
So I think his argument for what could happen is my argument for why we should avoid it. And so I think that's why we have to be especially cautious. So my counsel is for us to be cautious, to be prudent, and not to be in a situation where we actually have naval forces in a situation and where that could lead to that spiral. And again, that's why I answer the question in the negative, because I think that the scenario he just laid out is so horrific. And I would add this. I'm not sure that the United States is actually up for this. And I don't like saying that. But I look at a country in which suburban parents, especially suburban parents, were absolutely afraid of sending their kids to school, even after the evidence was out about COVID, that kids were not at especially high risk of dying of COVID. So if we have a situation in which people are not willing to run the risk to educate their children to kind of return to normalcy in their schools, how are they going to feel about a draft of those same kids and the potential that tens of thousands of them are going to die fighting for a place that's thousands and thousands of miles away, in which they don't really quite understand why we're doing it? I'm not sure that the American public is up for that. And if the American public is up for it, then you could surely bet that others will look at that, and our credibility of doing some of the things that might be necessary to deter China won't be there. So I do worry about that, and I'm guessing you would worry about that too.
I'm honestly confused by the COVID schools thing instead of Taiwan, but it doesn't matter. Let's go to the.
But real quickly, what I'm saying is that
you totally lost me on that one.
What I'm saying is that Americans are worried about being in harm's way. We have a safetyist culture. Does anybody deny that we have a safetyism culture, right? How are we going to fight World War III that you just laid out in a safetyist culture? Because World War III, regardless of how safetyist we are, is going to be really brutal. Ask the Ukrainians. This war will be worse than what the Ukrainians are facing, and that's going to be nasty. And I get what I'm saying is I'm not sure we're up for it, because you don't get it's not going to be, like I said, beanbag.
So I think we can agree on the fact that the phrase war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Probably is a good one there. So now it's your turn. We're right on time and right on target. We have an opportunity to hear from you. I think we have mic folks ready. Am I correct? And we also have some ballots we're going to hand out. We can go ahead and move to that. I think we can do both those things somewhat simultaneously. Let's get the ballots out. And We would like to hear your questions and the answers. If you could do us all a favor, succinct questions that invite an answer, and we'll give both individuals, we'll rotate responses here. So, first question, then watch for these ballots being handed out. We'll give you a few minutes to answer those when we're done here. We'll start right here. Go ahead and stand and ask your question. It's coming. Give us your name and who you are.
Okay, I'm Russell Kingery. I am a junior here at CCU. So, you guys have both made a lot of great points from both perspectives. I've felt a little bit like it's ships passing in the night with each of your framing of the debate. You've talked, Mr. Will, you've talked about limiting it to defense. You've talked about defense in a military sense, and Mr. Rogan, you've talked about it in a larger sense. Could each of you frame the disagreement? What's the focus of the disagreement between the two of you?
I don't think we disagree on some of the basics around.
I do think we disagree on some of the basics. Yeah.
I mean,
I disagree with you that we agree. And therefore, we do not agree if we do not agree that we agree. But to answer your question directly, and I think it's an excellent question, the difference between the frame that my friend Will is presenting to you and the frame that I'm presenting to you is that mine is based in reality of the situation in China and Taiwan. And his is not. His is based in an ideology that is derived from coming to the conclusion before you look at the facts. And if you think that restraint is the thing that you are meant to push, then that becomes the answer to every question. And if you already know where you're going, then it doesn't matter what road you take to get there. Because I am not coming from a position of ideology, because I'm not part of any ideological group. I'm not a neoconservative. I'm not a restrainer. I'm a little hawkish, sure, but it's not really a group. It's more of a personality trait, you know. But what I'm telling you is that the reason my frame is correct is because I've been to Taiwan, okay, many times, and I've spent time there and talked to the people and the soldiers and the leaders and the kids and the reservists and the head of their cyber division, a very smart woman by the name of Audrey Tong, and the opposition, by the way, because what we haven't talked about is what does Taiwan want? We never even broached the subject of what do the Taiwanese want. And I'm telling you, it's complicated, all right? There's a big portion of Taiwanese society that would be very happy going back into China, or at least not that mad about it. There's another portion that would be very mad about it. There's another portion that doesn't ever think about it. And my point is that the reason that we have to talk about the attack on Taiwan as being multifaceted is because the attack on Taiwan is multifaceted, okay? And if we talk about it as one thing and not the other, then we're just not being honest about the dire situation that our Taiwanese friends are in. So my frame, which is that the attack on Taiwan is based on the national security realities that you all know. Nobody in this room could, having an honest conversation with themselves, could think, oh, the economic coercion is not an attack. The political coercion is not an attack. It actually results in the loss of lives. Talking about COVID, when the Taiwanese, when they identified COVID early, they were banned from dealing with the World Health Organization. They're not in the World Health Assembly. They couldn't get the vaccine. People died on that. Many people. Because Taiwan couldn't get the vaccine because they're not in the World Health Organization. Why? Because Xi Jinping says, right? Now, is that World War III? No. But that is an attack on Taiwan's identity. It's an attack on their status. It has real-world effects. Real people died because of that. And that's what we're facing. That's why we have to defend it. And anytime you hear nuclear war, World War III, your sons and daughters are going to die, you know that that's a distraction from the real issue at hand. And that's why you should vote yes, because I'm talking about the real issue at hand.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we would go to all kinds of wars and these would escalate and cause problems for us, I know is a fantasy, given that in my lifetime it's been Vietnam, it's been Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, now Ukraine, which you've said we're in. So the fact is we have to worry about escalations because this is a reality. And if we're going to talk about where we've been, I've been to Afghanistan, I've been to the Middle East a lot, right?
But not Taiwan?
No, I've not been to Taiwan. Okay, but is that really dispositive about whether America? I've been to America.
Something.
I've been to America. I know American national interests, right? Okay, the fact is that
Sure.
I think that you're wrong that we disagree so much. Okay,
Disagree.
right.
again, we disagree
But
more.
fortunately, not disagreeably. But the point is that I think I already stipulated up front that I think that there are lots of things we could do. Encourage Taiwan to adopt a different approach, right? A defensive defense that Eugene Goltz talks about. The idea that we should sell weapons to them to make them a porcupine. The idea that my view is that we should simply ignore the rise of China, when I've said publicly for years that China is our biggest strategic threat, not Ukraine and Russia, not the Middle East. That I don't know where he's getting this, right? It might be from other people, but it's not from me. I think China is a serious strategic challenge. That's one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we're acting quite prudently, because China is dangerous, okay? And the status quo is advantageous, so I don't want to upset that. So I wouldn't be doing things like having the Speaker of the House fly to Taiwan. That's disruptive of the status quo, okay? I would be trying to be much more careful about how we engage China, because it's a potential peer competitor, and one that we are going to have to talk to, because this isn't the Soviet Union in which these are two spheres effectively. China and the United States are deeply coupled economically, and we can't wish that reality away either. So again, I think it's just, I think to say that my argument is that we should stick our head in the sand is just not true. I don't believe that at all, and I don't think I've said that here tonight. What I've said is we agree about most things, but where we disagree is that when the rubber hits the road, I don't think the United States should be sending in the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and the Army into a hot war with China that, as we know from all wars, no matter how fast or easy you think it's going to be, is going to be much harder and much more dangerous. That's all I'm saying, and if you believe with me that that's a big problem, I think you vote for the negative.
Josh, quick response.
Very quick response. We actually have some examples of what happens when we send the U.S. Navy in to defend Taiwan. They're called the Taiwan Strait Crisis, okay? So it's not...
What year was that?
1954 and then 1956.
How strong was China relative to today?
I'm just saying what happened. We stood up for Taiwan and China backed down. Now, does that mean that the power dynamics haven't changed? No, but it proves that sending U.S. military to support Taiwan doesn't necessarily result in World War III or your brothers and sisters dying on some sort of aircraft carrier at the bottom of the ocean. But anyway, let's go to the next question. Yeah.
Young lady over here.
Hi, my name is Braden Adams. I'm a freshman here at CCU, and I noticed that no one mentioned the possible connection between Iran and Russia and China.
Thank you.
Yes, no. But I was wondering if either of you recognize that China is noticing that our resources are being spread thin, because right now the U.S. is sponsoring a double proxy war with Israel as well as Russia. And so I'm wondering if y'all did recognize that, and if you believe that China, as noticing that, would be setting a trap for us if we were to defend Taiwan.
So I think that we should prioritize in our foreign policy, because we can't do everything. And you hear people talk about how we need a Department of Offense instead of a Department of Defense. You hear people talk about how we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, that we could do things in all three major theaters of the world, and also in peripheral theaters, because we have to confront X, Y, and Z in Africa and Latin America. What they're doing is not being mature adults when it comes to strategy. You have to prioritize. And my prioritization would be in Asia. I think that Europe is wealthy and populous and could handle the challenges posed by Russia. I think that in the Middle East is a lot less strategically important to the United States. That doesn't mean that the Israel-Palestine or Israel-Hamas conflict isn't a serious one that we should keep our eye on, but I don't think we need to be adding Saudi Arabia to a security commitment to the United States, okay? I don't think we need to be in Syria and Iraq. I'm glad we got out of Afghanistan, because I think that we need to prioritize and privilege Asia as the most important challenge. That being said, it doesn't mean that we have to, I think, have Cold War II. I think there are other responsible ways to kind of handle an intricate, complex relationship with our most important strategic challenge and one of our most important economic partners in the region.
Right. So you all just saw the sleight of hand there, right? I hope you picked up on it. It's the bait and switch of the restrainers. It's that, well, we have to prioritize China, so that means we have to let go of Ukraine and Israel. Okay,
Didn't say that.
But we have to prioritize China, so we have to let go of Ukraine. But then we shouldn't defend Taiwan against China. So which is it? Are we letting Ukraine go so that we can help Taiwan, or are we letting Ukraine go because it's a preview of letting Taiwan go, which is actually what I think will happen if the restrainers really ever got control of the foreign policy, which thank God they haven't had. So I think it's like that's the rhetorical trick that I think we have to be careful of. But to answer your question directly, I think the nexus of China and Russia and Iran is crucial to understand for two very quick reasons that I'll give you. One is because they're working together. They're allies with each other, militarily, diplomatically, but let's just say militarily. Iranian drones killing Ukrainians, Iranian drones killing Israelis, Russian soldiers helping Hamas, Chinese money fueling the whole thing through Russian crypto exchanges. They're all working together. They're on one team, okay? That's not because the China hawks made that so. That's because they view their interests as overlapping, if not aligned, okay? We're on the other team, okay? So that's why I think you can't, abandon Ukraine to fight China. The second reason is because it's obvious, I think, and I don't think even Will would dispute this, that Xi Jinping is watching Ukraine as he calculates. Now, you could use that obvious observation to argue that either way, but suffice to say, I think we can all agree that Xi Jinping is watching Ukraine. And my argument is that he's watching to see if we have the resolve. Because deterrence is what? Resolve plus capability. So if we don't have the resolve in Ukraine, of course he's going to calculate that we won't have the resolve to defend Taiwan. And it makes it much more likely that he'll do something crazy and attack. And then, of course, if we do have the resolve, then we're in the war. Because that's what happened with Putin. He underestimated our resolve. We actually had more resolve than Putin wanted. But whatever you want to say about Biden, he did a huge commitment to Ukraine. It's not a restrained policy. It's a very aggressive policy. It's not aggressive as, I don't know even who I might mention, John McCain, if he were here. It's not as aggressive as John McCain would have wanted, but it's a pretty aggressive Ukraine policy that clearly a lot of people in this room disagree with. It's not a restrained policy. But the point is, if we had a restrained policy, we just let Putin take over, Ukraine without a fight, what do you think Xi Jinping would conclude from that? I argue that he would obviously conclude that it's open season on Taiwan. And so, in that sense, our responses are connected because the people that we're fighting are coordinating their attacks and helping each other.
Yeah, again, I guess I disagree with some of the history there, right? In Vietnam, when the French were there at Dien Bien Phu, and the United States didn't want to get involved, it wasn't as if, West Germany and the French fell to Russia, to the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union didn't say, because the United States wouldn't fight in South Vietnam at that point, that somehow this was going to shatter other parts of the alliance. That's not really how states act, right? They look at the specific balance of power, balance of resolve in that particular theater and judge it, right? So, for example, what did Slobodan Milosevic do right after the United States went after Saddam Hussein in Kuwait, right? He attacked, not because he said, George W. Bush stood up for the Kuwaitis, therefore I shouldn't do anything, because that's not how states calculate these things, right? So I would just say that credibility, there's a vast literature on this about how credibility doesn't travel from one theater to another when it's disconnected. So I think that frankly, the issue of whether the United States defends Japan, for example, is going to be relevant to the U.S. national interest vis-a-vis Japan and China, not whether the United States stands up for Ukraine. I just don't think that that's the situation. And I think that there are ways, again, to reassure allies that matter more than countries like Ukraine, which isn't an ally and has been somewhat of a partner.
I saw the young man in the gray first.
Hi. So I had a question I'd like both of you to answer. So I don't want to be like warmonger or put innocent lives in risk for no reason. But is it conceivable that in some way, if Taiwan is invaded, it could be a good idea to take the opportunity for America and the allies in Asia to go on the offensive to put down the threat of China to a point? Is that conceivably a good idea, or is that not?
Should we speak in unison? I think so, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment. I just think that would be this is probably a scenario in which both of us agree that that would be risking an actual nuclear exchange, because that's why China has nuclear weapons. It's so that regime change in Beijing through military power doesn't happen.
Yeah, my view on this is really simple. I think a lot of the criticism of American foreign policy and military intervention over the last 40 years is that it's been too hubristic, that we think that we can change other countries to be like us, and that we can determine the development of other countries. And although I'm accused of being a hawk, I say very clearly in my book, and I'll say again, China's development will be determined by the Chinese people, one way or the other. It's hubristic of us to think that in other words, the big mistake of engagement with China was that we thought if we were just really nice to them that they would just evolve and reform and open up and they'd become just like us and everything would be hunky-dory. No, they have their own issues, okay? And that's not a problem that we can solve. What we can do, which is, and again, I could get into a whole thing about the differences between the China challenge and the Cold War. Suffice to say, it's not the Cold War. It's a different thing. It's a systems battle. The Cold War is not a great analogy, so I'm going to avoid going into litigating the Vietnam War and just say this. When we talk about China, we have to understand that the basic strategy of competition, we can call it containment. I call it engagement and containment. Containment and engagement. Con-gagement. There. I just coined that. So if we talk about the base, that's what it is. We leave the door open for them to do the right thing, and then when they do the wrong thing, we respond. Okay, that seems like a pretty responsible policy to me, and it doesn't involve regime change. It doesn't involve telling the Chinese people, here's the government that you have to have. It involves standing up for our values and our interests, which I argue are in alignment, not in opposition to each other. Now, to be quite honest, what that really means is that we're containing China until something changes. Not that we're going to change it, but that, in other words, we don't really think that we're going to be able to change the fact that Xi Jinping is an aggressive, totalitarian. Just read what I have a bunch of quotes here. I'm not going to waste your time with them. He's been very clear about his plans, okay? He wishes to alter the world order to make it safe for repression and autocracy and Chinese success of the China dream and the success of the Chinese Communist Party. That's his goal. He says it every time. He believes that Taiwan reunification is an integral part of that. He's never going to stop thinking of that. What we can do is we can push that timeline forward and make it harder for him until he dies, okay? Which could happen tomorrow, knowing what a snake's nest that CCP, people dropping like flies, falling out of windows, all of a sudden falling off of walls. It's really dangerous to be a senior official in China, okay? Lots of hazards abound, okay? Now, what comes after Xi Jinping? Maybe it could be a worse murderer. Maybe it could be an even more evil person. Okay, fine. That will have to be resolved by the Chinese. But what we have to do is abandon the hubristic engagement that says we can change China and realize that our mission is to protect ourselves and our interests and our values, which includes protecting our allies and partners. That, to me, is restraint. If that's restraint, call me a restrainer, okay? Because it's not about changing China. It's about preventing China from changing us.
I'm good.
You have time for one more. I had one over here. Was it your question, sir? Yes, sir.
Dragons to slay. What is your opinion? Was he wrong?
I mean, John Quincy Adams is one of my heroes. The speech that he gave that you referred to, July 4th, 1821, is probably the greatest statement of American prudence outside of Washington's farewell address. My worry, again, is that the United States has a reservoir of power and strength and security that we should not diminish by going abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And again, I feel bad for people who are in bad neighborhoods, right? But the question is that should we go abroad seeking these challenges when they're not required of us? And again, my answer is no, in the sense of using direct coercive force in the event of an attack. But it is that I think we can do other things that would be helpful in other ways, which I said originally, right? My idea is that we don't stick our head in the sand, but it is that we avoid some of that more kind of, I think, dangerous thinking. The other thing is, like, I'm not that convinced that we should view all these things through a kind of black and white lens. And I think that the danger of he talked about congagement, but a lot of it is containment, right? I think the danger is we miss opportunities in this process for the engagement part. I worry that that congagement won't be a stable equilibrium. It'll be Cold War II or containment as opposed to some of those other things. And look, when it comes to other issues, a lot of people talk about the importance of China and working with China on climate change, if that's something that you think is really important, which a lot of people do. Working with them on some of the issues having to do with trade policy and figuring out a way in which we can maintain a positive trade relationship without us being taken advantage of or them changing the international order. So I think, again, you're going to have a balanced, prudent approach. And one thing I would say that relates not to Quincy Adams but to George Washington is he talked about the danger of falling too much in love or too much in hate with any regime. And one of the problems, and I'm not going to blame Josh for it, but one of the problems with a lot of hawks in Washington who sound like Josh is that they do that love-hate thing. They engage in Manichaeanism, black and white thinking. And I just don't think that's the most appropriate way to view foreign policy, which is also why I think we can do certain things with Taiwan but avoid an active defense, and that makes sense.
Yeah, I would just say sometimes the monsters come knocking on your door. You don't have to go to find them. And do we want to wait till that happens? And if we know that if the dragon is dragon in this case, a little too on the nose, being that it's China, but if the dragon holds a press conference in front of the 20th Party Congress of Dragons and says, our intention is to take Taiwan, and then after that we are going to dominate the region. Then after that we will change the world order to make sure that our system is the one that survives and not the Western system. Document number 9, Xi Jinping, he spelled it all out. The whole idea of Western society, free press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, all of that Xi Jinping considers to be an existential threat to the survival of the Chinese Communist Party and its rule. So they're being very clear about their intentions. We're not searching for the dragon. The dragon has made a bunch of speeches telling us that he's coming. And the question is, how long do we want to wait to answer that? And the second thing is that this idea of abroad. I think the main difference between the world that John Quincy Adams lived in and the world that we live in is that abroad doesn't mean what it meant in the 18th century, okay? Because international geopolitics and national security and economic prosperity know no borders. The Chinese Communist Party threat knows no borders. It's here. It's in your phone. Okay? It's in this university. It's definitely in Washington. Okay? So we don't have to go anywhere. Okay? And that's the internet-connected world we live in. I agree with Will. We can't overreact. I agree with Will. We need to maintain relations with China where it makes sense. We have to leave the door open for them. By the way, they're not answering the call. Nobody's home. We should keep that light on. Of course we should. But the problem with applying John Quincy Adams to 2023 is that that world doesn't exist anymore, and we have to deal with the world that we live in. That, I think, is a very realist perspective.
Well, just one more thing on that. The world in 1821 had the real possibility, because they had just lived it less than a decade earlier, of an other country invading our country, burning the capital to the ground. That is not possible in a world of nuclear deterrence. So I think that there are lots of analogies, and there are things that are relevant to that world and things that aren't. And so I wouldn't look askance at those heroes of the founding like Washington and Adams, because I think they had a lot to speak to us today. And the world might be smaller and flatter, and what is the other thing that Tom Friedman said when you talked to a Cairo cab
Please
driver?
don't attribute Tom Friedman's views to me.
But my point is that the world is a lot like it's always been, and the dynamics of international politics, when you read Thucydides, it sings to us today, just like it did then. And I think that, again, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we can get counsel from people like Adams.
So I just got the stop signal about a minute and a half ago, and so we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to invite our speakers here to give their brief closing arguments, since I think you've both been extremely articulate in what's been shared already. For those of you that had a question, and I saw a couple of hands that just were we unable to get to, I suspect the speakers are willing to stay around afterwards and at least address any other questions that you might have before they depart. So we'll go ahead and look at those closings right quick. Meanwhile, ballots are being tallied right now. We will have you folks all on your way here shortly. We'll start out with our positive. Josh. Make sure your ballots are in. Got a couple ballots up here up front.
To frame this as a choice between World War III or letting China take Taiwan is to play directly into China's hands. That's what they want. That's the choice that they're presenting us. It's a false choice. But we should be clear, there is no escaping the larger confrontation with China. Not military confrontation, systemic confrontation. There is no neutralist position. There is no position that can be occupied by wait and see. In fact, we are already engaged. In fact, the competition is already on. The attack on Taiwan is already happening, and we are already defending it. So when I say vote for defending Taiwan, I am actually saying vote for doing the thing that we're doing now, and do not pull the rug out from our partner at the worst possible time with the worst possible consequences. Vote for it because it's in America's economic interest. Vote for it because it's in America's strategic interest. And if that doesn't get you there, vote for defending Taiwan because we as Americans and human beings either support the rights of other human beings for dignity and self-determination or not. It's the strategic thing to do. It's part of our national interest. And although it might not matter to some, it's also the right thing to do. And I hope you will vote yes. Thank you.
Will.
So I'm going to praise my debate partner here, which is to say that, Josh is a very smart version of an argument that I've been hearing my entire life in the foreign policy community. And I think that my challenge to that thinking is that I don't believe that this thinking has done America well. I think that this approach that is more activist, that I think ignores some of the realities of the changing of the world from a unipolar world to one that may not be multipolar, but is certainly getting closer to that I think that we have to take a different approach to the world. And one of the things that I think we haven't really talked much about is again, what are we defending for or against here, right? So, and I reference this in relation to what happened to the American capital in the War of 1812, right? The United States is actually a really secure great power. You could argue that we're the most secure, strongest country in world history in so many ways because we have two big moats between us and the rest of the world. We have friendly, weak neighbors who don't represent a threat to us. We have nuclear weapons. That means that what happened in the War of 1812 can't happen again because anyone who challenged us to do that would be incinerated. Because mutually assured destruction works, it won't happen, but we are so strong in that sense. And we also have a really strong conventional capability that could keep any country from our shores. And so when we talk about doing some of the things that we're talking about here, I think what we're doing is we're putting greater risk on us for very little gain or even negative gain, right? For a negative result. Because we have consistently as a country, we have gone abroad in search of these monsters to destroy, and it hasn't been helpful for us. So what I don't want to do is rely on some of these same arguments to walk ourselves into another conflict. And what's remarkable is that American foreign policy, from the 1990s to the post-9/11 world to now the kind of great power competition, the players all stay the same, the interests all stay the same, the people getting rich in the military-industrial complex stay the same, and the arguments are basically the same. 1938, Manichaeanism, protect against these evil people and name your country. And the problem is that that's just not how the world works. It doesn't mean that China isn't a real strategic threat that we have to handle and deal with, but I don't think that we need to do it by militarily defending Taiwan in the event of it, and that's what I believe the prompt was, and that's what I think you should, because otherwise we both won, because I agree we should do other things other than defend China militarily. So thank you.
Let's give both our speakers a hand. We're very grateful for you being here. Well done. Well done. As I say, I'm quite confident they'll be willing to stay a few minutes afterwards. Are our tellers ready with our results? Or are they still telling?
Free books for anyone who votes yes.
The thing is we don't know what people thought before. So that's always a challenge in these things.
Now, Tom, were you planning on having a survey taken online? Okay, so you want to go explain that to them real quickly, what they'll be doing there?
Thanks again to
Will and to Josh and Mr. Scheffel. Wonderful job moderating. Great audience questions. I was very impressed. What you have an opportunity to do now is you've voted by paper, but this survey will also ask you who you thought won the debate, but also it asks what you thought before the debate and what you thought afterwards. We can want to sort of see the shift in your opinions. And then there's also an opportunity, like I said at the beginning, if you want to hear more about what ISI does, if you're interested in getting more involved, there is an ISI society at CCU, as I'm aware. There's also an opportunity, it's optional, but there's an opportunity to encourage you to sign up, get involved in the ISI community. I was an ISI student, and it's made all the difference for me. So we'd love to see more of that from all of you. Are we ready? We're ready. All right, back to you.
They're certified. All right. Thank you, Tom, very much. And let me encourage you to go grab that code and do that vote. So here we go. And I'm going to ask you when we're done to try to help with your question. How many of you would be willing to raise your hand and say you changed your mind from what you came in and what you voted now? Affirmative, 57. Negative, 75. So give yourselves a hand for being involved, and good job, good job. Shake a hand there. Now, I gave you a fair warning on this just for fun. How many of you came in thinking one thing and changed your vote? See hands. Obviously, we don't know which way, but we do know that you've impacted, both of you. Again, let's give our speakers a hand. I'll look to Dr. Sweeting or possibly Jeff. Any final comments on behalf of the Centennial Institute of the University? Well, on behalf of Centennial Institute, thank you for coming out tonight. Fantastic, fantastic. We'll look forward to the very next one. The Chancellor's office is always on the job trying to set up these kind of debates. And so well done, gentlemen. Thank you again. You are all dismissed.